It's time for the Margin Matters Minute with Money Man Jason Brown.
All right, welcome back everybody. Jason Brown here with another edition of Your Margin Matters and the Margin Matters Minute. Today we're doing something a little different, a little unique to what I've been doing on my YouTube videos. I'm actually going to be interviewing my friend Thomas Butterworth, who has 2 debt-free degrees. That's 2. He has earned 2 debt-free degrees. So this video is going to be discussing the student loan debt crisis, alternatives to debt in college. How do we get through college debt-free without going into debt? And also another reason why I'm interviewing Thomas is because I am going to be using his interview as part of my next book that I'm writing that is going to be addressing this very issue, how to avoid debt while in college, where I'll be sharing many people's stories like Thomas's. So let's get right into it. Thank you, Thomas, for joining us. And I know that your story is going to inspire many people and encourage many people to avoid student loan debt as they go through college. So Thomas, let's start first with, just real quick, let everybody know what degrees you've earned. You have a bachelor's and a master's, I believe, so just share what your degrees are in.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. So, hey, everybody out there. So my degrees that I have, so I like Jason mentioned, I graduated with 2 degrees, debt-free. The first degree was from Southern Polytechnic State University, which is now Kennesaw State University. I graduated with a bachelor's of science in accounting with a minor in business. And that was back in 2011, I think is when I officially graduated from there. And then I graduated with a master's of business administration with a certification in ethical leadership from Kennesaw State University as well.
And what year was that master's in?
Master's graduated in 2018. So
okay,
not too long ago.
Perfect. So this is, I think you said you were 34 years old. So this is actually good because I'm older. So, you know, the big issue with the college is the expenses have gone up just tremendously over the years. And you are more of a recent graduate and you can relate to the cost of college now.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to someone like me, like I got my undergrad in 1998. So college wasn't nearly as expensive back then as it is now. So,
oh, yeah.
So this is actually really good and relevant for the younger generation who are facing higher costs of college. So let's just jump right into it. And the first question is a little more of a background before we get into the college specific question. So just share with us, what is your view on money? Did anybody teach you about money? What is your background? Like did your parents ever teach you anything? Just like when you grew up, like what was your attitude toward money as you were a youngster?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I really had no concept of what really money, like how it could be impacting your lives or really how it evolved, or not involved, how involved it was in your life. So for example, I was very fortunate at times, but as I grew up, I really didn't have a lot of people give me guidance on money. As my parents, tried to shield me from reality or the real world at times. They also kind of created a world where I just didn't understand the concept of money. Now, my parents both worked very hard, came from very challenging environments, both of them, right? So they struggled themselves. So as I was younger, I also think they were kind of learning themselves as well. As I got to the high school realm, started working part-time jobs, I think my parents kind of mentioned things to me, but it was more so about opening an account to put money in, and didn't really teach me any concepts or any, justification of why we were doing things. And this is also prior to the internet, really, right? So there wasn't really any good, quick lookups or advice or outside, other than reading a book, which at the time I did not do. And so that was kind of that. Now my grandparents, I would say, were more influential as I got older to graduating high school and into college, my young adult also life, giving me guidance, because they both grew up on the end of the Great Depression. And so they had a little bit more insight and struggle that they had come from. So that's kind of the background of that. And to my view on money, I really didn't have like I said, I didn't really have a concept of what really money was and how much it can impact lives. Now, I did hear my parents growing up having intense discussions about money, but I wouldn't say that they had, they had separate accounts, and neither wrong nor right. It's just they had separate accounts. And so I remember hearing them saying, "Oh, I thought you were paying this bill, or you're paying this bill," and not really, kind of the sitting down and kind of talking through all the bills. Right now, that's kind of the summarization of that.
Very, very interesting. I like asking that question because everybody's story is different. So much of our attitude and mindset toward money is just what we learned, growing up, what our parents may or may not have told us, what our friends, did, or relatives did, or so much of that is culture or society based too. But everyone's story is so unique and different as far as their background toward money. So let's kind of progress a little bit. So when you were, I guess, in high school or getting ready to go to college, what was your situation with finances as to going to college? Was there ever a notion of, hey, I need to get student loans, I'm sorry. Do I need to take out student loans, or, what was your mind? Do I need to go work, or are your parents, did your parents have any money to help you? So talk about entering your undergrad and how you managed through all that.
Yeah. So, to be honest, I really didn't have a lot of conversations until potentially my senior year, when I was actually applying to colleges. Right. And so, from that, I had no idea really what the options were. I mean, there was no education, no awareness necessarily, especially in the high school that I went to. There was, everybody's going to college for the most part. We did have I would say, I don't know what you call it. It's kind of like a tech, not college bound individuals kind of program that we have, but I would say 90+% probably were in the track to go to college at that time. So right. As they were saying, well, in college, you need to be prepared, or it's going to be a little, going to be much more intense. Well, that's great, but I really had no idea. So my parents, we were banking on the Hope Scholarship, right?
Okay.
And that was really the big concept from that I was hoping for is, I have to keep a 3.0, which I think at the time was, they would cover 100% of the majority of your tuition, and I think books, and maybe some of your housing at that point in time. But that was kind of the go-to was Hope Scholarship, because just like you mentioned, the cost at the time, which was much more affordable. And this is, back in the 2004 time frame, is when I would have graduated in high school and started college, right? So, we're looking at that time frame. So I would still honestly say that in 2004, it was still somewhat affordable definitely compared to what it is now.
Okay, so is that what you leveraged? You were able to qualify for the Hope Scholarship, and were you able to maintain that and keep that?
So that's, and I guess to further the conversation, originally the plan, also part of the plan is that my parents and grandparents would assist with any potential additional costs that were unforeseen or not covered by Hope, right?
And incidentals.
And and that's, I also wanted to live on campus, right? So that was kind of the big question is, my parents said, well, if you want to live on campus, you're going to, I think the first year, they assisted with it. But at the same time, we had worked out a deal in my first year that I eventually ended up breaking a deal. And so I lost my support, right? And I lost, and I say that there's a background I'm sure I'll get into in a little bit more detail later on. But I lost Hope eventually. I did harness Hope for as long as I personally could. Right. But the deal my parents and I had worked out, I definitely went back on personally. Not understanding truly how fortunate I was at times to be able to have that. And that's kind of the embarrassing part of the story. And I say embarrassing, I'm sure many people have been in the same situation to where, to be honest, I had something so valuable that somebody was willing to pay for any other costs. And that I had Hope Scholarship, to where I pretty much flushed that down the toilet. Not really, I was definitely not in a mature state of mind at the time. I was not mature enough to go to college, but because that was the track everybody was supposed to go down, everybody was rushed into it. And so that paved the way to why I had to adapt and adjust to paying it for myself, right?
Okay. So yeah, let's get right into that. So then what did you end up having to go work some part-time jobs or kind of gain some income for yourself to pay for, I guess, the gap in coverage that you needed or from the scholarship that you lost?
Definitely.
Talk us through that. Like, what did you end up doing to get money to pay for the rest of your school?
Yeah. So, I ended up getting several part-time jobs initially, and especially, this is, I don't know when that was, probably around the 2000 and between 2005, 2007, probably.
Okay.
Right. So, I was working part-time, but I was also working potentially 40 hours a week in multiple locations. So I worked as a lab technician for a dentist office part-time. I worked as a telecom specialist, and specialist in quotes, right, is for a telecommunications company where they were a wholesale company. And so they allowed me to be extremely flexible. But also what I did on the side, which I think was the more beneficial part, is that I house set for a lot of people.
Oh,
right?
interesting.
And that was a big thing for me, is house sitting, because not only was I able to work, these part-time jobs and go to school, but in the afternoons or evenings, I would, house sit for these individuals and get paid, per day, whatever the rates were. And that subsidized a ton of my ability to be able to pay for that, because while I did have hope to an extent at certain points, I eventually lost hope.
Okay.
And so that was to where I had to become extremely creative and realize that I have to pay for this, right? And in the process of doing this, I changed degrees. Because I did a self-reflection and realized that the degree I was in, I loved as a hobby, but hated as a career. And so this is also during, around the time of the recession as well.
Right.
And so gas prices skyrocketed through the roof during this time frame. We had people being laid off left and right. And at one point in time, I did get laid off from one of my part-time positions, but another one picked up, thankfully, right? And so that's kind of how I was able to subsidize, and also took me 7 years, right?
Oh, okay.
And so and that also encompasses my change in degrees from start to finish, right? I was actually 1 year away from graduating with my first degree, realizing that I just don't want to do this anymore. And that was a tough pill to swallow. My parents really were not excited about that. My family really wasn't also. And then I just said, I'm not happy in this, right? I just don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And so I'm very glad I made that change and kind of did that self-reflection. And that's kind of the path that I took. And so I worked those part-time jobs. Eventually, while in school, still in my undergraduate degree, I was offered a full-time position at the telecommunications company I was working for.
Okay.
And that allowed me to pay for the schooling during that time as well.
Okay. So during this whole process that you just explained, was there ever a thought in your mind that, well, let me just go get some student loans, so I don't have to work. You said you were working what, 40 plus hours. When you put all those part-time jobs together, you're working 40 plus hours a week. Now that was a really, really cool note about the side gig of the house sitting.
Yeah,
that's something that is really beneficial to someone could do that and really make some extra income with very minimal I guess, labor, I guess. So, I mean, your house, you're set at somebody's house. I'm assuming you're staying in the house, taking care of the pets or whatever, looking after the house. They're paying you, but you can also be there doing your homework or, working on a class project or whatever it may be. So that's a really good gig to get. But so back to my original question, sorry. So was there ever a thought of, hey, I need to go get loans? Okay. Talk us about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in reality, that's kind of the thing that everybody goes to, right? And in reality, that's what I went to. I went and sat down with a financial advisor at my school. I say, they're not advisors. They're the financial services individuals. They could be advisors, but they advise you on the student loans. And when I sat down with them, my parents, and this also goes back to the relationship I had with my parents on finances, is that I was not going to go to my parents and say, hey, can you loan me money? Because that was just not something that was ever brought up as an option. And I kind of felt embarrassed to do that as well. It's one of those that, hey, I've potentially failed at what I wanted to do. Can you help me in this situation? Right. And so, sorry, let me turn my phone off real quick. So from that point, I looked at it, and because my parents wouldn't co-sign with me on these student loans, especially from a public, or I guess a public and private offerings, right? Is that I was kind of concerned about doing it, because I realized that, yes, I can take out this money, but how am I going to afford, I wanted to live on campus. I worked as a resident advisor for a while to live on campus, but at times, I didn't make a paycheck. And so I had to find ways, at that point in time to be able to pay for these things. And realizing that the student loans were an option, but I realized that a lot of them were unsubsidized, which would start gaining interest from the time you take them out. And then some of them were subsidized, which is, the route that I hope people, understand the differences of. And I think we need more education on that. But it was something that I was taught, by my grandfather, and this is where my grandparents were, is that don't take out, loans that you don't need. Don't take out credit cards. Don't take out those things, which in our society was kind of taught into us, right? Is everybody needs a credit card. Everybody needs student loans. Everybody, it's just things you do. Everybody has a mortgage. And those type of conversations, I saw it as an option, but because I realized that if I just sacrificed on the short term, that in the long term, I wouldn't be paying 10 to 20 years on student loans. And fortunately, because of the cost at the time of the degrees, I was able to have that money. And I eventually moved back home to my parents' house. I had that opportunity to do so, and they were, they welcomed me back, thankfully. But at the same time, it was, the deal is that as long as you're in school, we'll pay for, your meals and stuff here. But once you're done with school, you're going to have to find somewhere else to live at that point in time, or pay rent, right? That was their conversation. So from that side, I was very fortunate. But from the degree side, I'd kind of, realized that, I was able to pay for it. And if I just sacrificed a little bit more, I wouldn't have to take out those student loans. And so that was kind of the mindset of that. Now, student loans definitely was an option for me, but thankfully at the time I did not take them out.
That's a very, very interesting perspective at such a young age, because you said something that I think most youngsters of college age do not really grasp, is that you said, I would rather work and hustle and work all these jobs right now and avoid potentially paying off student loans for the next 10 to 20 to however many years, the rest of my life. And I think that's something that many people don't realize. They think, well, I think there's some the big issues with the student loans is people don't realize how much they're getting into, right? They think, oh, well, I just need $10,000. And then it ends up being $80,000. And then you find yourself, you're 45 years old and you haven't made one student loan payment. So this is what's happening to people. And is they egregiously underestimate the cost of college when they sign up for the loans, and they say, oh, well, it's not going to be, I'll be able to pay it. I'm going to get, and another thing they underestimate terribly is how much money they're going to make right after college. Like, most people aren't making a six-figure salary when they're 22, 23 years old. They're making $30,000 a year in their first job out of college, because guess what? You don't have any experience yet. You don't have work experience. So it just depends on, of course, what field you go into. But that's another issue, is the salaries aren't high enough for you to pay that loan back as quick as you want. Then the other issue is, what people look at is they'll take the cost of the college, like the first year cost, right? When you're freshman year, okay, this is what it's going to be. And you look at all the money, okay, it's $8,000 a year. And they factor in that same cost for every year. So what happened to you? Like you just said, I was in college for 7 years. So guess what? Year 2, year 3, the cost goes up every year because of inflation and several other factors. But year 7 is way higher than what you paid in year 1, but people don't take that into account. That's something that people don't realize. So those are things that I try to educate people. And what you said was a lot of wisdom at a very young age So really good for you.
Well, I thank my grandfather for that one.
That
Right?
there
I
you
mean,
go.
is
You listen to your grandfather.
the one person I listened to at that point in time in my life, right? But it was, to your point though, and to highlight a little bit more, when I went to Southern Polytech, when I started in 2000, I think it was 2004, to live on campus, a meal plan, and all tuitions, and I think roughly books, was I think 35 or 37, $3,500, right? That's
Mhm.
all inclusive. Now, that doesn't include Hope. That doesn't include anything else. That's just flat out. I think tuition was 1,200, and then everything else was pretty much the cost of living, the meal plan, and the books. When I graduated in 2011, the cost to take classes was around the $3,000 mark.
Wow.
Right. So to put it in perspective, now they changed where a full load was 12 hours, and I think now it's 15 hours and things of that nature. So there were additional things, but at the same time, it was the cost increased substantially over those years.
Right.
And that's just 7 years, mind you. Right.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And that's something that that's the big problem with the student loan debt crisis, is that the affordability of college has gotten out of control.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you were saying. But let's jump into so you just shared about your undergrad experience. Yeah. So now let's share how in the world did you avoid student loans the second time for your MBA, your master's degree? So share that story.
Yeah. So this one, actually, I had less stress financially.
Okay.
And I say that because I can't stress enough for people, if you have a company that really offers a solution to where you can get tuition reimbursement to some level, right? Whatever that may be, if it's 60%, 100%, any percent, please, if you're looking for a degree program, harness that, right, to your fullest extent. That's what I did. Right. I at the time I worked for a company that not only had the tuition reimbursement program, but also had no time requirement for that agreement. So in other words, some companies will reimburse you for your tuition costs or your costs for your school, but they expect maybe a year of employment after that, or some time of employment, or you owe the taxes on that or something similar to that, or owe the money back, depending, I guess, on how your contract reads. But from that stance, that's how I was able to do it, right? I actually worked a full-time job. My wife and I had been married I think I started in 2000, and it's either 15 or 16 is when I started my master's degree program. And from that, we found out my wife was pregnant the first semester that I was, and we had been planning on having kids as well. So we knew that it was going to be a potential. I wanted to start before then. And then, I was working a full-time job. And then, thankfully the two places I ended up working during that time frame of my master's degree both had those reimbursement programs. And that's how I was able to get my master's degree completely debt-free, is harnessing those programs and using some of my personal funds to be able to buy the books. And please, by all means, look for virtual books, look for those. The company I think I used at one point in time was Chegg, was a company.
Right,
not
Chegg.
to throw, that was
very
one.
popular.
Amazon has those things, but if you can, and professors seem to be these days pretty, or at least the ones that I had previously, are pretty accepting of, hey, this book's going to cost me $350 for one semester. What other options are there?
Right.
I'm not saying I won't buy it, but that's a lot of money. $350. I mean, that's a tenth of a tuition cost per semester potentially. So you look at those type of things, and so that's how I was able to do it, right? Is harnessing the fun, the opportunities that were in front of me. And both of the places had, one of them had 100% reimbursement, and the other one I believe was up to an 85% reimbursement.
That's fantastic. So those reimbursement programs, they just covered the tuition. Is that what I understand? And then you were saying you just paid out of your own pocket for the books, but you were looking for like the cheapest option for maybe book. And I know you can rent books now, I think. And like you were saying, maybe find alternative options. Some teachers will actually, there might be a PDF you can download instead of buying a book, or like, hey, we're just going to go over this one chapter of this book. So just get the PDF or what. there's lots of ways to save on that. But did you have any other costs besides the books that you had to pay for?
Yeah. So the two plans that I had, the two companies I worked for, not only paid tuition, it was a certain amount that they would pay up to. I think it was it's either $5,500 or $6,500 on one of them. The other one paid 100% of the cost. That included the fees. And so I can't stress enough to other people out there watching this that fees also can add up. I think Kennesaw State University, as a 15-hour full load, I think has up to almost $1,000 worth of additional fees on top of the tuition. And so that wasn't the case when I was in my undergraduate program. We had fees like an athletic fee or something, but it was 25 or $50.
Right.
But because of the lack of funding for certain areas, these fees have drastically skyrocketed. So in my original, when I was in my first part, I had to cover a percentage of the fees originally, right? And I took a little bit longer as well, right, to graduate than, some people can make it through the program, I think in a year and a half. It took me, I think, 2.5 years to graduate with this program. But it was one of those that my wife and I, we set aside, and we sacrificed a little bit on the things that we would normally do to be able to afford this degree, right? So that was something that, because there was more than just one person involved at the time now, right? We had to come up with some agreement, some plan to say, hey, we have to live still, but what can we do to cut back costs, and what can we do to really not have to stress ourselves financially?
Right. That's good stuff. Now, the next two questions, actually, I'm going to combine them into one because you covered of some of them. I had, what challenges did you face paying your way through school? And you covered some of that, but the next, we'll kind of combine these next two questions I had. Looking back, is there anything you would have done differently regarding how you've handled and managed money during your college years? So you can talk a little bit about that. And then were there any other specific challenges? I mean, you've mentioned a lot of them already, but were there any other specific challenges? I guess one of the biggest challenges in your undergrad when you lost the Hope Scholarship, that's a huge challenge.
That was the biggest.
And then you talked about changing your major. That's a big challenge. But were there any other challenges that you haven't mentioned yet that you faced? And then was there anything that you would have maybe done differently with, how you managed your money, or just maybe how you manage your time during your schooling process?
Yeah. So I guess to answer the challenges part, one of my biggest, and that's on the, on the face, like the pay my way through school, was kind of a peer pressure, and an unspoken peer pressure, I should say. And that's, you graduate in 4 to 5 years and you should be out of school. Right. And so I dealt with that personally a little bit because I saw a lot of my peers and my friends graduating from colleges, and they were being, successful at times. Other ones graduated, during the peak of the recession, so not so much at times. But it's one of those, you're comparing yourself to other individuals, and that was something that I did. That also, looking back, realizing that I didn't choose to take out the loans to potentially expedite how quickly I graduated either, right? So there were times where I didn't take full loads. Most of the time I did take, 12 hours minimum, which I think is still the full load capacity. But there were times where I took 15 hours. I think 18 hours was the maximum at the time. Right. But that was kind of my big thing, because realizing that that's just a part of the student loan game necessarily is that, hey, get out in 4 years or 5 years, and, everything, you don't have to work. You don't have to do this. Everybody dedicates their time. And so that was kind of the big thing for me. And then also wanting to go on trips with my friends as well. I had a lot of friends that traveled the world that were fortunate in different opportunities or used student loans to help out with certain travel expenses. And that was something that I wanted. I would love to see tour the world, especially, being younger and single at the time. It's, that was something that I struggled with, but still realizing and trying to make that sacrifice, but also to be able to go and save up for certain trips. It's not that I didn't travel the world, but I did go on local trips and things like that with friends, camping trips and whatnot that were a little bit more affordable, but still to that. So looking back, I don't know if I would, in my instance, change 100 or change a lot, because I learned a lot of lessons, earlier on. And I say earlier on in my young adult life, because that's given me the situation that I'm in now, fortunately. Now, that being said, I wish somebody would have sat me down and taught me, the management of money, because I had no idea how to handle money. right? And I think, you and I have talked about my credit cards in the past, and that's something that I also had to pay off during school when I was working, right? Working
Right.
part-time jobs. And so it wasn't just paying for tuition and the fees, it was also working to pay credit cards off. And so, there was a lot of lessons that I learned, but I wish going back, I would have had access to information, which I probably did, just didn't know about it.
Right.
Like your book Margin Matters, or
Mhm.
Your information that you put out on a routine basis. Like having access to those type of things, to me, especially at a younger age, makes a big difference. And having somebody sit down and teach me those things and teach me the life lessons, and then also for me to be able to receive that too, right?
Right.
I think that's a big part, because and I appreciate everything my family did and my parents did. They sacrificed so much and gave me so many opportunities, but I didn't receive what I needed from that side. So I would say that would be the big thing. But I was also the first one in my family to graduate, on my direct side, to graduate from college. And so nobody really had that experience. And I think that was
Right.
kind of the piece that, I'm very fortunate for. But realizing that, you know, a lot of the life lessons that I learned earlier on in my life, instead of later, I learned from the trials that I had to go through, and realizing, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And trying to create the solutions. So that's kind of the long-winded, I guess,
Right.
explanation on that.
That's good. That's really good. So this, of course, this whole interview is revolving around the student loan debt crisis. We've kind of danced around it. Uh, we're all a part of it. We've gone through school. You've avoided debt tremendously, which is an amazing accomplishment. So do you have, of course, this being 2020, an election year, and then going through the pandemic, without, this is a political issue. I'm not going to get political. I'm trying not to politicize it, but it is a
Sure.
political issue. The student loan debt crisis is a hot button media topic. It is a big issue in politics. It's a debate with different sides of people having different opinions. Do you have any opinions or thoughts on just the situation as a whole, and maybe any advice that you would want to share to the younger generation that are facing just like rising college costs? How do I avoid this? I don't want to graduate with $80,000 of student loan debt. What are some of your thoughts on all that?
Yeah. So, to answer I guess the direct question, how do I feel about the crisis, on this, the student loan crisis, and I say crisis being that I think it's an unfortunate thing that we've gotten to, but I think it is, if we look at history, right, we look at the mortgage crisis that we went through, the mortgage bubble, we went through that type of thing. I think we are uneducated uninformed, not uneducated, uninformed on certain decision levels. And I say that from a student loan part as well. I've had many conversations with individuals that, don't know the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized, but yet they were able to sign the agreements and not really understand fully what they're getting into. Now, I think there's more awareness a little bit now. But truly sitting down, and I would say especially now, right, there are a lot of companies out there. There are a lot of positions out there that are not necessarily seeking college degree level individuals to fill certain positions. Not saying that there aren't companies out there, but they're starting to look in a little bit more holistic view, right? Realizing that college is important in many cases, but not everybody needs to go to college to be able to get qualified in certain things. So for example, there's IT certification companies out there for all sorts of different type of technology certifications. You don't have to have a degree to get them. And you also don't have to take out student loans normally to get qualified for that. But a lot of companies are looking for those certifications, instead of or on top of, the degrees, depending on the level of position. And so I just really want people to reflect on, if you're going to take out student loans, right? Look at, let me see if I have it here. Okay, here we go. So it says, I wrote down, think about what you want to do in life, right? Just don't accept, I'm fixing that. Don't accept rushing to college because you feel like you need to go to college, right? Think about some of the, what the job market is for that type of situation. What's the likelihood of you getting hired directly out of college? Do you need additional experience? Those type of conversations. And so, how much money you're going to be making? What's the average starting position in that level, right? Not saying you'll get a starting position, but you got to look similar to what you were saying. My first job out of college, I was making $27,000 a year, right? And so when we're looking at those type of things, we need to understand how much we're taking out in student loans. Now, there are certain positions, especially in medical environment, right, where you don't have $200,000+ to take out to be able to pay for those type, or not take out, but to put down for that type of degree. But at the same time, there's opportunities in those positions usually pay substantially more, right, in different positions. So look for opportunities out there. Don't always go, look at starting potentially in a local college, right? Not a big name college or a 2-year college or something similar to that, and then transferring into a 4-year college. I look at Kennesaw State University as one of the big things as well. I looked up, I think it was this week, and just to take 15 hours in an undergraduate level in state's $3,774. That includes fees, right? That's tuition and fees.
Mm-hmm.
But then to live on campus, I think one of their lower end plans was $3,825 per semester. And then the meal plan was $1,700-ish per semester. So you're looking at almost $9,000 per semester. And that's just, not saying just Kennesaw State University, but comparatively to when I was there, that's substantially, increased.
Right.
And that's something that I really recommend, everybody to really evaluate, is to know how long it potentially could take you to pay off that information. So sorry, my animals are starting to jump up here.
We can interview the animals next, right?
Yes, indeed. But that's
cool.
that's my input on that. Right?
That's good. Well, that kind of leads into this will be my last question actually for us. And you kind of answered some of it. So we have this notion in society, like I talk a lot about good debt versus bad debt in some of my blogs and some of my other videos. And that's a big debate too in the personal finance world. And is there such thing as good debt versus bad debt, right? So most people will say that good debt is something that you invest in that appreciates in value, right? Like a house or any type of really investment that you will make money off of, right?
Yep.
And most people will repeatedly say an investment in yourself, meaning education, or if you want to start a business or something like that, is always a good investment no matter what, right? Well, most businesses fail, and education, we just talked about the student loan debt crisis is out of control. So we've kind of reached a point of, is investing in yourself always good debt to have? Or is there a situation where maybe it's not? Like, so do you have any thoughts on that? You kind of answered a little bit this in your last segment there, but do you have any specific thoughts on, is education always a good investment? Is it always good to go into debt for education?
I think so. I do agree with the statements of good or bad debt, right? But I think it's also something to be considered informed and uninformed debt, right? And I say that, and I say it to that way that, yes, I think education is extremely important personally. I think it is. I think continuous education and challenging yourself to an extent is very important, or reading and learning, right? Because you for me, I enjoy learning and I enjoy challenging myself, putting myself in some challenging situations. But at the same time, I think there's a limit to the cost, right? So for example, if you say investing in the education is always important, if I want to choose that and I choose to go to Kennesaw State University, I've evaluated, I've looked at all my options, I've considered in-state versus out of state. I have, gotten opportunities or scholarships or, saved up money or something, but I have to take out a little bit of debt, right, to be able to afford it. I think that's different than, I have a friend of mine, not to say any names, and that regrets taking out student loans because not saying that they aren't very, they weren't very, they're not very successful because they are, but they ended up having to take out almost $90,000 for an undergraduate in accounting degree, right? He said he expects to pay it off in 20 years.
Wow.
And he said that if he would have just taken the time, a little bit less time, he would have so much less stress in his life. But do I believe there is good debt? I don't know if that's the best way to say it, but I agree with you. I don't know of any better way to say it. But yes,
Right.
I think there are forms of debt that are necessary, and I think there are other forms that are unnecessary, which I think is probably the majority. But,
Right.
So that's kind of I guess to summarize the question up a little bit is yes, I think there are times where people have to take out debt. Maybe not so much in the student loan debt, but I recognize that, I was fortunate, especially in my situation, to have somewhere to live, right? I know many people out there that unfortunately are either homeless or living on campus is their only option. And I wholeheartedly, I feel for them. And, to me, that's a necessity debt at times, right? But I also had a friend of mine that was in that situation. He bused to Atlanta every single day when we were in college, worked a full-time job, and then came back and went to school, right? That was what he did. And I respect him. It took him 7.5 years to graduate college, but he graduated debt-free. And I respect that wholeheartedly. And not everybody has that the patience for that, right? Or the self-control, right? And I don't think he actually ended up changing degrees. It just took him 7.5 years, but that was his goal, is to graduate debt-free. And he's extremely successful in that, what he does still at this point in time. So
that's a great story of just perseverance right there.
Yep.
Just stretching it out. Maybe he was going part-time for some semesters just because that's all he could afford at the time. So he just kind of stretched it out and went on his plan, his timetable, versus what everybody else, society might have told him, hey, you got to get your degree in 4 years. Well, most people don't get their degree in 4 years. Most people take an average of 6 years. You took 7, I took 5.5. I took almost 6 years as well to get my undergrad. So yeah, so that's a very, 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 very good story about your friend there. So lastly, do you have any final thoughts or any other advice maybe that you want to share as kind of like your final thought on all this stuff?
Yeah. So, I guess final thought wise is try to be as informed as you can. And as, I don't think we've touched on it too terribly much, but I know that many people believe, don't want to talk about finances, right? We don't want to talk about options. We don't want to have those conversations because it's personal, right? It's emotional.
Right.
And so how do we, I encourage those not to open up, 100%, if you feel comfortable, please do, but, to really think about, having that trusted relationship with somebody to be able to have those conversations, talk about the struggles, talk about, what options are there, because, these institutions, and I say institutions being the financial ones, they make money off of interest, right? That's how they make, that's how they're making their money. So it's kind of that the cog in the wheel is that let's think about the pieces at play here. Think about all the options. And again, I'm not saying that student debt is bad always by any means. I think it has its place at times. But there are definitely opportunities out there, even undergraduate wise. There are companies out there that will pay completely for your undergraduate degree, right? I know COVID's thrown a little bit of a spin into the situation here, but I highly recommend people try to find those companies and ask questions, right? The company I was working for in my telecommunications company, they worked with me substantially. They gave me the opportunities at certain points, and until I asked the questions, nobody, they were kind of oblivious to the different struggles I was going through. And so to sit down and have a real conversation with the owners of the company or the manager as well, opened up opportunities for me. Right. And so I really encourage people to not to get discouraged, even when you fail, right? To keep pushing forward and to realize that, we all have our struggles. We all fail at times. And especially in finances, as emotionally it is look on forums, right? There's plenty of forums out there and discussion boards that people can ask all sorts of questions, and they can give you really good guidance, So that's what I recommend, and I wish everybody the best on that side.
Excellent stuff. Mr. Thomas Butterworth, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your story of how you earned 2, not 1, but 2 debt-free degrees. So if Thomas can do it, anybody can do it, right? Everyone's story is unique and different. Everyone's path in life is different, but I'm here to say you have more options than going into debt. There's so many more options to earning a college degree than going into debt. So do your research, like you were saying, Thomas. Check out employment opportunities that provide scholarships or tuition reimbursement. There's so much money out there, scholarships and grants that people don't even know exist. Just take the time. We have the power of the internet. You don't have to go to the library anymore and try to find a book, a resource book. You have search engines at your fingertips to find opportunities to pay for school. It is out there. Thank you, Thomas. So this is Jason Brown saying thank you so much for watching. You can learn more about all the opportunities that I'm sharing on my website at yourmarginmatters.com. And you can also purchase my book on Amazon. It's called Margin Matters: How to Live on a Simple Budget and Crush Debt Forever. And that's available on Amazon.com as well. So thank you very much, everybody. And we will see you next time.